Hi, it's me, Brooks. Welcome to Heal This. Today I have Tammy Cooley on. She is my best friend, and we have been, Thelma and Louise in it for about over 20 years. And today we are going to share some very intimate parts of our life and talk about our journey through our faith transition and religious trauma. And, I said it on the previous episode, and I'm going to say it again. I am an ex-Mormon, and I'm going to let Tammy tell her own story and what she says about her own self regarding being Mormon. But this is important, I think, because all of us have some kind of trauma around a higher power. And maybe it's not considered trauma to everyone, but it might be just a transition. Like, what did you think and what do you think now? And how did that play a role in your decisions? And how does it play a role in your decisions now? So, anyway, I was just telling everyone in the last episode that I was really wanting a big family and that I really wanted to keep my body safe, I guess. So, I saw a PBS special that was talking about, don't hurt your lungs by smoking kind of a thing. And my mom smoked. And so it totally freaked me out because I was like, oh my gosh, And so I kind of made a promise that I wasn't going to smoke or, really drink or do anything bad to my body. Never did drugs. And when I was younger, like I just kept my body really pure. And because of that commercial. And then when the Mormon church came into my life, I'm like, oh, this fits. We have families can be together forever through being sealed in the temple and the word of wisdom. And, all of that just made sense to me. Never mind the fact that I knew nothing else about the
Right.
history or the fact that I was making huge covenants to wear long underwear and, other things that I just think now are super bizarre. So, where does this start for you?
Well, as we talk about, a lot, I was born into the church. My family is from Utah. Generations upon generations have been involved with the church, and so it was just a way of life for me. Um, Although, everyone has their own individual story about how they come to know if it's true for them, right? And I did all the things that you're supposed to do. I got baptized when I was 8. Um, you know, just my grandfather was very involved in the church, and um, he baptized me. And anytime I needed a priesthood blessing or any of those kinds of things, um, I would get that from my grandpa. And I want to preface it with, I think for me, where this comes from is a long line of family expectations. I, literally have on my mother's side of the family people who immigrated from Denmark to the
Mm-hmm.
United States as Mormons. They joined in Denmark and came here because they were chasing that dream. My grandmother told me, stories of her grandparents when they came over, that they were literally looking for streets paved with gold because that's what they were told.
Mm-hmm.
And when they got here, it wasn't anything like that. And their lives were hard and harder in some ways
Mm-hmm.
than in the country that they just left, because now they have to learn a new language and assimilate and
Right.
try to grow, food on a farm that's full of alkali. And,
Mm-hmm.
just a really, really hard time. So I think for those that have been born into a certain faith and it's just part of your family lineage, this is just the expectation, this is just what we do.
Right.
And the first time that I really started questioning, I was 15, 16 years old. um, I didn't have, my parents were divorced, and I didn't really have that strong nuclear family. We're all going to church together. I was
Mm-hmm.
the only one doing that for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as a really young person, in a lot of ways, that was hard, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the expectations of you as a young woman in the Mormon church are still there, but I was upholding them by myself. And um, in the small town that I grew up in, there was a lot of judgment around that. And
Mm-hmm.
so at 16 years old, it just I finally snapped. Um, I got a call one day from one of the leaders of our young women's group. And I know now, looking back, that she was just trying to help. But at the time, I got a phone call from a very pushy, nosy person. And, it felt very judgmental and it felt very intrusive.
Mm-hmm.
And, she basically said, "Hey, we've noticed some things about you. Some things have changed, and we just want you to realize you need to be careful. You need to be careful about who your friends are, and, you know, your reputation and what you're showing the world." Um, okay. So that was the first time I left the church. I just said, "Nope, I'm not doing this." It didn't seem to matter. Like, it was so superficial. It
Mm-hmm.
like no one literally saw me working and trying so hard, and doing it on my own, and not having that kind of support and still showing up and doing the things.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt so disappointed and alone, even more alone than I already had felt. And I just said, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. So, um, fast forward to me being a young adult after graduating high school and moving out and starting my career and living life. I met a man. We got married. He ended up wanting to join the church, and we hadn't been active, but my whole family was. And so and we were living in Utah. So there were, some big influences and a lot of other things going on for him that was influencing that choice. Um, but what I ended up seeing happen was the more he was gravitating toward being baptized and joining the church and going into the church, were more abusive behaviors, more control, more
Mm-hmm.
"you are my woman and you need to obey me and don't you listen to the prophet" kind of a thing. And so for me, that that led to, in my mind, you'd have to ask him, but in my mind, it just led to more self-righteousness, more
Mm-hmm.
entitlement,
Mm-hmm.
um, and an excuse to act and treat people, poorly.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I ended up experiencing some pretty severe domestic violence and
Mm-hmm.
getting a divorce and leaving that situation. And so I call it, that was kind of my second brush with the church. And then I left again. And I had a real George Costanza moment when they, just when you think you're out, they pull you back in. A third time because I have to laugh about it because it on one hand it is just kind of funny, like you walk away, man, just keep going. But it really wasn't that easy, and it wasn't that easy in Utah, you know,
No.
um,
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
especially 20, 30 years ago. I mean,
Right.
things have changed some, but it's still very much a culture.
Oh
It's
my gosh.
even if you're
Yeah.
not out, even if you're out there, it's just still this culture. And so sometimes it's easier just to go along. But
Yeah. So let's talk about some of that because I think there's a lot of people who really don't understand. I mean, there's people who go to church on Sunday and they read the scriptures, they read the Bible, um, maybe they do some like a Bible study with some other ladies, or um, they do some service, right? But for us, it's a whole entire life thing. Like it is not just a Sunday thing. It is not just a Bible study thing. It
mhm,
is every single day, every single choice you make. And I definitely did not know that when I joined the church. And, you know, they prefer that you're baptized at the age of 8. And I was coming in at, 15, 16. And I, man, I didn't have primary. So you start going to primary when you're about 2.5 years old. And those things are being taught to you then. Obviously, if you're born into the church, it's being taught to you in utero. You're bathed in it. Your DNA
mhm,
it's running through your veins, honestly. But it is, so I had a lot of catching up to do. And I shared before that I was very obedient and that I really wanted to, I wanted to have this little family. And I it was very romantic in my eyes,
right,
and it was and I really loved the idea of traditionalism, like that's what I saw in my grandparents, and I loved them, and I just adored them, and I wanted
mhm,
to have that, so bad. And so the church kind of portrayed that a lot of the time, that, it's this great man and husband and father, and he goes off to work and you stay home and raise children and, make dinner. And it's just all so romantic. And it's just like real life is just not romantic. And,
right,
but when I was beginning in the church, I was in the young women's program, which you mentioned. And so just for others to understand, you're going to church on Sunday for 3 hours. That's broken up into 1 hour blocks where everyone meets in the chapel, that sacrament meeting. You're, taking the bread and water because we don't drink wine, or, we didn't do grape juice, right?
alcohol, right,
Is blessed by the priesthood, passed, right? We do all that. Then the second hour is Sunday school, which is pretty standard, I would say. Although we have other books that we add to, and I hate to even say we because, like I said, I'm not a part of that anymore. But the Mormon Church has the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants and the Pearl of Great Price. Like there's a lot of other texts that come along with what we're studying. It's not just the Old and New Testament. So you have that second hour. And the third hour is basically broken up into women are going to their women classes and the men are going to their men classes, priesthood classes, and then young men and young women, and then children. Right. And so And in all those separate classes, you are basically being taught how to be a wife or a mother, right? And how to do those things righteously. And um, I think that's what's happening in priesthood. I'm not sure, like I wasn't there. We don't get to,
By design, you're not
but
there.
that's right. And, but then a lot of us have callings in, primary or young women's. But when I was in Young Women's, you had the Young Women's program, which is basically a program where you check off the boxes of like, I'm sewing this craft and I'm showing that I can, use these skills, or I'm baking this thing, or I'm dedicating hours and hours of service to someone else, right? And it's basically teaching you how to be a really good person in your community. And at the time for me, and I don't feel like there's a whole lot of things wrong with that, except for the fact that I didn't really feel like I mattered as a human. It was just more kind of like, this is your role.
What can you do for me? So go back to the calling. I don't know that every church calls it that.
Sure, right.
But it's how you volunteer, right, for the
Mm-hmm.
church. So there's jobs and service projects and lots of different things that people can do, which again are not necessarily bad, right? These are good things. I just distinctly remember being married the second time and thinking to myself, all of our time and efforts and talents and everything is going toward this thing,
Uh-huh.
and other people, I mean, especially my husband was always gone, to work, and then would come home and have to do some type of service for another family or other people. And you're not supposed to begrudge it, right? You're not supposed to be jealous of that, but it's so hard when so much of your time isn't valued in that way. It's for everybody else,
Right.
and you're at home with kids struggling, really just trying to, like you said, check off all the boxes and do all the things that are being required of you every day. And I think, I know that it was a struggle for us as a couple to find that balance. We talked about it a lot, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Um, how do we put our family first and then, give what we have to give? I know better now how I would approach that if I were to ever to do it again, which I wouldn't. But
Mm-hmm.
the struggle at the time for just the amount of volunteering and giving was extraordinarily heavy on my relationships.
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, um, yeah, and of course we're going to go back and we're hoping to do a series of these so that we can share kind of more of our journey, how we met, even because we haven't really shared that.
Yeah.
But as we sit here in the early morning with our coffee, I mean, you were not allowed to have coffee. Honestly, I do not know how I raised three tiny little babies with no coffee, no alcohol, no outlet, no nothing. It was a little bit of insanity happening. But yeah, no, I mean, so you have the 3 hours of church on Sunday, and then typically you would have a midweek meeting, whether it was something that you served in the calling to teach others, or it was something that you went to, right, to receive some kind of learning or whatever. So now we're up to 4 hours. And then if you were in some kind of a calling, then you would have meetings, right? And I remember sometimes being like, oh my gosh, with the meetings, like so now we are meeting at least an hour, but for me, it was at least 3 hours. So because
Hmm.
I was either in primary or I was a music director or, like coordinator or whatever. So it's like I was spending 6, 7 at least hours a
Hmm.
week outside of the home, um, you know, usually dragging 3 children around, because
Right.
it was like, got to get them all ready, got to get them there, got to, look a certain way and act like you have it together, which was hard in itself.
Hmm.
And all of that's taking away from your own family, your own time. There was no time for yourself. Like, absolutely. That's just taboo. Like, you don't get time for yourself. There's no self care. Like, you don't get to do that. Um, I don't think. Do you think so?
I don't think that this is the thing that I struggle with because I don't think it is something that's said, right? It's not something where somebody's like, don't do this, don't take care of
Right.
yourself. It's it's unspoken and it's subjective, right? So for
Mhm.
some people it's lost on them and that doesn't even occur to them and they do well, right, in the church. But for me specifically, there was so much that was unspoken, and again, not having, you know, role models other than what I could see happening at church with other people. What I could see is their best face. What
Right.
I could see is what they bring on Sunday morning, and everybody just looks perfect. And I
Right.
know that I'm not, and I'm struggling.
Absolutely.
And how do I do this in a way that's authentic to me and what I need? There wasn't anybody to talk to about that. You're just looking at what's being presented
Hmm.
and how your life really is and what the expectations you think are because of the doctrine and what's being taught to you, trying to put it all together. And for me it just felt like I was continually failing. I was always going to fail.
For
I just
sure.
didn't know how to put it all together.
Yes.
Tried
I
real hard.
tried real hard. Yep. I think for me it was like if I was really struggling and I spoke to the bishop about something, it was always just, well, just make sure that you're, oh, and then having family home evening on Monday nights, right? And make sure you're reading your scriptures every day and make sure you're praying every day. And I'm like, I'm doing all those things. Like I'm I'm on my knees praying. I'm serving. I'm doing all the things. And I'm like, and it's just it's not, there's just things that are just not okay. And yeah, and then even if I would share that with other, women, which I mean, I hope everybody realizes by now that I am a verbal processor and that I have to say things out loud, so just talking about any of it, I would always kind of get, the little side eye, like, are we supposed to be talking about that? Um, you know,
Right.
is are you sure, are you okay? Like I just always felt like you said, I always felt like, man, I'm just really not doing this right or well. And especially because I came into the church, I just figured that everybody else knew how to do it better than me and that they were more righteous and that I was failing. And so there was a lot of that. I think that's pretty common actually. Because
Did it
we're
well,
striving
look,
for
I mean, there's
we're
two of
striving for
us.
perfection, right? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and we have totally different backgrounds.
Totally
Although,
different.
mhm. Yeah, so I have watched quite a few people go through this process, and that is something will happen in their life that is not part of the church, right? You lose a family member, or your marriage is really, really struggling, or somebody gets sick, right? Or maybe one of your family members is gay or, doesn't fit into the role of what we talk about at church. And then you have to really start asking yourself the questions and, inside here, like, okay, so we're saying that God is this. right? This one thing, right? And I'm really feeling like maybe God's so much more than that. And
Right.
and so we start to kind of go down the rabbit hole, right? Of asking the questions. Well, if this isn't true, like I don't really feel like this is true anymore, then is this true? Like we start to go down those questions. Now, I will say this just to keep continuing to educate people that, we are told that in the Mormon church, it is the one and true, oh, how did they say it? One
The
true,
one and only true church.
that's right, the one and only true church. And they say that, from the pulpit all the time. We also have a prophet and general authorities who are like right underneath the prophet, and they are based in Utah. And yeah, I mean, I also just have had a lot of fear around even talking about it or even just saying, I'm not a member of the church anymore. I'm an ex-Mormon. That's just not part of my life anymore. And there's a lot of, like I said before, there's a lot of gratitude I have for parts of the church, but I also feel like there were a lot of things that were kept from me that probably would have changed my decision if I knew them and somebody else was kind of saying, "Hey, 15-year-old Brooks, is this something you really want to be a part of?" You know?
Well,
So,
and even then, like, because I've had that conversation with myself too.
mhm,
I think I've reconciled it a little bit differently than you have because I don't necessarily think that, especially as a kid, like I couldn't get away from it. And it's not that I didn't have a choice. I could have said, no, I don't want to do that. And my mom probably would have been like, okay. But I did. Right. And I've had times in my life where I consciously chose to go be a part of it because there were things about it that made me feel safe, made me feel
sure.
like there was a plan for my life and a way to be that was going to protect me.
Mhm.
And so, I think having made what I thought was a well informed decision as an adult still really wasn't because I wasn't peeking behind the curtain,
Mhm.
right? I wasn't saying, oh, well, let's talk about Joseph Smith and his polygamy. Let's talk about, all of the taboo subjects. They specifically tell you not to go looking for negative
Right.
things about the church because you'll find them.
Mhm.
And you don't want to spend your time debating everything that's potentially wrong with the church when the reason that you're there is for safety and protection and all of
Mhm.
those other reasons I just said. So I don't know. I think that anytime someone has a faith crisis, so you were talking about asking yourself questions.
Mhm.
For me, it didn't start with asking questions.
Mhm.
It started with, I am so overwhelmed. Something's got to come off my plate. And what are the things that I can take off my plate?
Mhm.
And 3 hours on a Sunday and all of the extra time. And like for me, it was just a no brainer.
Yeah, that
Something
makes
had to
sense.
go. Something had to go. And that was the thing. I thought, okay, what's going to happen if I just set this thing down?
Yeah.
And then that for me was the slippery slope. It
Mhm.
was, wow, my life seems to be a little bit easier. Wow, I seem to be getting more and better sleep at night, not up worrying about all the things I didn't do the day before.
Right.
Um, and then, of course, just talking with other people, and you and I processed a lot of our
Mhm.
stuff, even though it started at different times.
Mhm.
And I think at one point we weren't, both of us, we weren't sure, like, how do we have this conversation? What's going to happen? Are we still going to be friends? Right.
Yeah, and I've experienced that. It's you and I, and also like I know you with other friends and me with other
Yeah.
friends that were in the church. And I'm just kind of like, you're kind of looking at each other like,
Like,
is it,
want to grab a cup of coffee?
and then it's code for, okay, cool, you're out. Sweet. Let's go talk. We could really talk now, instead of
Right.
like, well, if I say the wrong thing, you know, then you're going to have this huge judgment of me. And
Yes.
and it's not just a judgment. It is a literal feeling of like you are so much less, like you are so less than me. Like I don't even know how to say it. It's like because I remember feeling that way, and the only thing that kept me from really feeling that way all the time is that my whole entire family was not Mormon, and I loved them, and I would never say anything to them about it because I knew they didn't want to be Mormon and they weren't going to be. And I loved them so much. And so I was like, but they're pretty cool. I like them. I
Hmm.
love them and I like them. So how can it be that, there's only one way? Right. It's like I couldn't allow myself to all the way go there and put that judgment on people. Like, that's the other thing, right? We are completely trained to know, like, from pretty far away, they're Mormon, they're not Mormon, right? Like, you can just tell, right? Because you're
Hmm.
taught all the things. They're wearing garments, it used to be that you had to be clean shaven. And I mean, you could not have callings if you did not have a clean shaven face, right? A lot of
Or
times
tattoos,
no
or
tattoos, multiple piercings. I mean, even one time I remember somebody saying something about really red nail polish. And I'm like, what does that even
what?
mean? So you're telling me God is not going to love me now because I have red nail polish on? Like, what is going on? And it's just really taking one translation of something and just blowing it out of proportion and exaggerating it to fit, another belief. Does that make sense?
Hmm. It
Um,
does. But I think, again, it's the subjectivity of it, right? Like, people are
mhm,
interpreting what they're reading, what they're seeing, how they're feeling, whatever they learned from their family history, just so much of that influences how people act and behave. But there's an expectation, and even
there's a lot
now,
of
people
expectations.
people that I meet, when you're having well, where did you grow up? Well, I grew up in Utah. Oh, so you must be Mormon. Like, that still exists. It's like when we say we lived in Alaska, people were like, did you live in an igloo? Did you have a
Right,
dog sled? Right? Like,
right.
it's just it's just
Yeah.
part
Were
of
you
those
one of
cultural.
multiple wives? I
Yes.
get that.
Are
I've
you a
gotten that a
sister
lot.
wife?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right? Like, there's just these cultural things and kind of expectations. I mean, I can think of a few people over the last few years that, because they knew that I grew up in Utah and that I was Mormon, that I did participate, they expected me to be a certain way.
Hmm.
And, very submissive, subservient,
Hmm.
obedient,
Right.
these kinds of things. And I'm like, do you know me at
Right.
all?
Yeah.
It's not that I can't do those things, but it's just, it's not who I am as
Right.
a person. When somebody says, well, what's your religion now? Well, talk to me about, your spirituality. And I think that's, obviously a whole other video that we're going to talk about.
Yes, for sure.
But for me, even when I look back at how I participated in the Mormon church, for me, it was about love. For me, it was
Right.
about, safety and protection. And it still is. It still
Right.
is that for me. It's just happening in a less structured
Hmm.
way, right?
Absolutely.
And so, when people say, "Oh, well, you're different," or "Why'd you leave the church?" or, "Oh, that's so sad because now I'm not going to be saved," kind of a thing, right? Bless
Yep.
my heart. I don't know.
Right. Right.
Um,
We're definitely not getting into the highest degree of, heaven or whatever, glory,
yeah,
whatever.
I think I've made this joke since I was 17 years old that I was going straight to hell, but that all the best people would be there with me.
Yes. Yeah. My comment back to you was all the good bands, right? All the best
Yes,
bands are
all
going
the
to be
best bands are
playing.
going to be there.
We're going to have the best party. It's going to be great. And
Get,
I think, like, I want to make sure and just say, like, I know that, first of all, just like any other religion, right? There are really good people and there are not so good people, right? With people with not great intentions there.
right.
But there are a ton of really good people too that love their families and love their communities and
Hmm.
want to do good. And I truly do believe that. And it is something that they are just in a pattern of doing, right? Don't question, don't look at the history, don't even question why we do things, or does it even make sense, or is it even really about God, right? Like
Right.
sometimes I was like, I went to church for 3 hours, I don't even think we talked about Jesus or God or love or grace or any of that thing. It was just kind of like I'm like, what did we even do? I'm just feel depleted. I don't feel fed spiritually. And so I just want to make sure and put that out there, because I'm not trying to bash. I'm trying to educate and say, this is my story and this is your story.
Yeah.
And this is how we got here. And along the way, we have learned how to help other people transitioning from whatever religion they're in, because it is all about love, loving ourselves, loving a higher power, being connected to a higher power, and understanding that we can do so much more if we co-collaborate, with
Right.
source and love and all of that. And so that is the point of this. I also think a lot of times people don't really understand um, what the religious trauma is and what it feels like to get out of it, because they don't really just let you get out of it, and you have to really make some bold choices and really know who you are as a person and stand, in your power and say, I'm going to be okay. And I really
Hmm.
do believe that God loves me despite the fact that I'm, going to take off my long underwear and drink coffee, because I feel like I'm going insane trying to be perfect. And I had to do some of that, so
Yeah.
um yeah, I do think it starts and ends with love. And a lot of times religion, whatever religion it is based in fear and guilt and shame. And you got to find your way. And if it is working for you, awesome. Great. Don't
Yeah,
make any changes.
we are not here to bash it, like you said, and I'm so glad you said that because I think there's a lot of times where I've tried to have this conversation with people that are still connected to they don't want to have it, which is fine. If you don't want to understand me, you don't want to know where I'm at, why I don't need the missionaries at my house.
Hmm.
You know, I will feed them. I will help them. I will,
Right.
but I do not want to be proselyted to. I do not want somebody saying, "Oh, well, if you would just do this and that, you would be so much more blessed." I've never been so much more blessed in my entire life.
Absolutely. And more happy too,
And and
I would
and
say.
just completely myself, right? Like
Yes.
and it's not because I'm not connected
Right.
to spirit. It's not because I don't still get the same intuitive revelations for myself that I did when I was part of the church.
Right.
It's just that I'm not so bogged down with the expectations of another person or organization telling me how I have to live my life,
Absolutely. Yeah.
right?
So,
And going jumping through the hoops and doing all of those things. I mean, for me it was defeating and it was exhausting. And now that I've been able to step out of that, I can take the lessons that I learned about love and grace and doing your own, doing your own work and being your own person and all of those things that are good and apply them in my life and out in the world in a way that is authentic to me, that feels
yes.
good.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm having all these thoughts. That's why I'm writing them down so I don't forget. But I think when you are trying to check off all the boxes, right? Everybody's running the same race. We're all trying to check off the same exact boxes. It takes away the individuality of each person. You cannot express your authenticity and your genuineness like each person. Like if that means I wear tank tops and I have tattoo sleeves and whatever, like whatever that is for me, right?
Hmm.
I can't be those things, right? Because I have to be in the box, right, with everyone else, because those are the boxes we have to check to get to heaven, right? Which is a big deal, really big deal, right? But it takes away from living in the present time of now. And my issues, my problems, the emotional trauma I have, the things that I'm going through are not the same as everyone else's. And so it's really difficult to say, run the same race, and yet I'm made up of different stuff. And so
Right.
there's that constant struggle of feeling like I want to be these things so that I can, if I'm obedient, then I will receive the blessings and the love from God. And yet at the same time, I'm just not feeling it because there's things inside of me that I'm not working on, and I'm not healing, and I'm not moving in a direction of leveling up spirituality, right? It's just kind of the same
Well, and
thing.
how many women have you talked to who come from that ideology, whether it's the Mormon church or whatever other
Right.
church, who are struggling with their self-image, with their self-worth, with suicide, with drug addiction. They're
Absolutely.
just trying, they're
Not
trying to
just
get
women, men
through,
too, for sure.
I mean, they're just trying to get through and breaking through that. When am I going to be good enough? When is enough for me to feel like I'm going to be okay?
Yeah, for real. Yes.
That's the heartbreak for me about whatever is happening for for people in their religious settings, right? It's not that
Yes.
religion itself is bad. It's that
No.
if what you're taking in and what you're getting from it isn't feeling fulfilling, isn't making you feel like a better person, isn't helping you reach your goal for
Right.
this life, if you're not feeling good, right? Because I always say feeling good is the work. That's the
Mm-hmm.
work.
Right.
And if that's not happening, it feels like wasted time and energy and effort. So how do you pour that into yourself in a way that feels authentic? And I've talked to a lot of people who have left the church or who are thinking about leaving the Mormon church,
Mm-hmm.
and the level of guilt, like we've felt it,
Mm-hmm.
the level of guilt or what's going to happen when I say I'm no longer associated
Right.
is how I am as a person really genuinely good enough? Or if I say I'm not going to do this, does that take away from the life that I've built and the quote unquote blessings I'm going to receive in the celestial kingdom in the next life?
Right.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah. And we
Yeah.
spend a lot of time, um, you know, indoctrinating, right? We spend a lot of time filling ourselves, our children, whatever, with all the answers, to keep everyone in that line, right? To keep going. And as soon as it just doesn't feel like this is not working for me, it doesn't feel right, I don't feel good, like you said, then there's all of that shame, there's guilt, there's fear,
Fear.
there's all of it. There's so much that's going on. So, yeah, so we're going to talk about it more. There's more of our stories that we want to share. We want to keep going because I feel like the best is yet to come.
For sure.
Yeah, and just so grateful to have you, friend. I love you so much,
I love
and
you.
couldn't be here without you.
Same.
And so we're going to talk more about intuition and the authority that we have for ourselves. That we don't need any other authority to speak to God, source. What does that look like for us, right? And maybe a little bit more of how we met and how that evolved, and then how we eventually, maybe in a couple more, we're going to talk about what it looked like to leave. And again, you're not alone if this is something
Not
you've
alone.
struggled with in any religion and questioned. And yeah, we want to hear your stories. We want to share. We want to heal this together. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll talk to you soon. Okay.
Okay. All right.
Okay. All right. Bye.
Bye.